Hello, this is No Shot from RSA. In this video, we'll be covering the NetWitness server primary and secondary setup. That is, setting up a warm standby to your primary node 0. This will give us the ability to fail over from the primary to the secondary in the event of a primary fault. These are the topics we'll be covering today. We're going to do a review of the current environment. Then we are going to set up a warm standby server that is going to be like our primary. That is, all the resources, disk, CPU, RAM are all going to be exactly the same as the primary. We are then going to set up and validate the sync process. That is the data being replicated from primary to secondary, waiting for the secondary to take an active role. We will then fail over to this secondary, making the secondary a primary server, and assume that the primary has gone into a complete fault, that is, it is unrecoverable. There is a second scenario here, which will not be covered in this video, but may be covered in a future video. That is how to fail over and fail back in the event that a primary has a temporary outage. And we will cover that potentially in a future video. And then finally, because the failover was done because the primary is completely unrecoverable, we will go ahead and re-image the primary and set it up as a new secondary. So let's get started. Let's review our current environment. I currently have a node 0 primary. I denoted this with a dash with a P. We will rename this when this becomes a secondary later through a re-imaging, but for now, for the purpose of identification, this is my primary node 0, my only node 0 in the environment. I have ESA, a network hybrid, a health and wellness beta, endpoint log hybrid, a VLC, an analyst UI, and a log hybrid. And I've created in my Proxmox hypervisor a second VM that is replica of node 0 primary. That is, from a hardware perspective, as I mentioned earlier, it is like for like 256 gigs of disk, has 1140 image mounted. There's 4 processors, has 32 gigs of RAM, so on and so forth, mimicking the exact same specs of the primary. Now that we reviewed the environment, let's go ahead and set up our warm standby server. So as mentioned previously, this is a like for like with the primary server. So I'm going to go ahead and boot this off the CD-ROM and image the box. Now that the box has been imaged, let's go ahead and run through the TUI. And accept the EULA. Yes, we're going to select yes here because it will be another node 0. We're going to choose warm standby. We're going to select no here for this is not a disaster recovery scenario. We're going to put the IP of the primary. So in my case, my primary is the .100 and the secondary is going to be .101. And there's a caveat in 11.4. This will be extended to support other subnets, but right now the secondary is limited to being on the same subnet because when it takes over, it will have the IP of the primary. And so having it situated in the same subnet facilitates that. Let's put the host name. Secondary node 0, same information as the main deployment. We're going to change the IP here so it's not on DHCP. And as mentioned previously, this will be 101 with the same subnet and gateway, DNS. So pretty much everything is configured the same as a primary, except for this has a secondary IP, just so it can function in parallel for the standby backup sync. And we're going to choose local repo. And we're going to allow this to go through the orchestration. Now that our standby or warm standby server has been completely provisioned, let's go ahead and finish up the setup. So as part of the setup of the warm standby, it also needs to be on the same version as the primary. So our current primary server is on 11.4.0.1. So we're going to have to go ahead and get the standby server upgraded. Let's go ahead and go to our standby server. Now, as you can see, the server is on 11.4.0.0. We're going to have to get it to the same build. Some minor build differences may not matter, but in practice, it's better to have everything on the same version so you don't run into any unforeseen circumstances when you are trying to do the failover or fail back. So you can see it's 11.4.0 base build. I need to get it to the .1 release, the patch 1 release that's in my current primary site. So there's two ways we can do it. We can download the zip file and stage it through a CLI and upgrade and all that jazz, but I'm going to go ahead and just do it through live because that's the most convenient. Now notice that this is the backup server, and even setting up any type of sync would not have anything configured. The restore takes place when you're actually making it an active. This will not be a complete replica in real time, meaning you won't be able to log into your warm standby on a day-to-day basis and see all the changes that are in the primary. They're staged and ready for active through a configuration command. So I'm going to go ahead and get all this tested and get my live connection set up. And I'm not going to do much besides just upgrade. I'm not going to worry about content or any of that because this is going to be a failover. Let's check for updates. All the manifest files have been downloaded, and there we go. Now we can go ahead and update this host. We're going to go ahead and let that upgrade continue, and once it's ready, we can reboot this box, and then we'll be able to start syncing our backups to the standby. Now that the standby server has been upgraded and rebooted, it has a version that matches my primary site, we can go ahead and configure the data sync. Now before we do the data sync in a typical production environment, you will have to follow this step to license the backup server through your primary license. I'm going to skip that in this video because I'm in a lab environment. So let's go ahead and schedule the backup. So we're going to SSH to the primary NetWitness server. As you can see, I'm already on my primary site. This is the .100, and we're going to back up to the .101. So let's go ahead and copy this command. And this is a script that runs. The -D is indicating a daily run. That will be around midnight or 1 a.m. UTC. It will execute. And then the -I points to the IP address. So we're going to take this placeholder and put in the backup IP. Now that the schedule has completed successfully the first time, we can do a cron tab and see that there's a cron job set to run at midnight UTC every night. You can certainly go and edit that if you like. You can also pass in the -C and make a custom cron tab entry format if you like as well. I typically would just do the daily and then edit the cron tab as you need. Now on the secondary server here, if you go to var NetWitness standby data, we have our backup.tar file. You can see here that this is a 55 meg file when it was last executed. And every time this executes on the primary, this backup will be updated. And then there will be several files in here that you can restore manually if needed. So when this server eventually becomes primary, there's going to be files in here like etc host, the fs tab. There's a variety of things that you may need accessibility to that you may want to restore manually, like keys and whatnot. So they'll all be stored under here once the main file has been used as the restore. All right, so we're at a point where our cron job is set up. We ran the initial command against our backup server. We have a backup dated just 12 hours old or so, and it's going to run again here in about 5 or 6 hours. But we're going to go ahead and assume a false state. So here's my primary node 0. Here's my secondary node 0 that has at least one synced data. I haven't been making much changes over the last 12 hours or so, so I'm comfortable just doing the failover here for the purposes of video. So let's go ahead and simulate a false. I'm just going to go ahead and shut down this machine and assume there's some hardware failure, catastrophic failure, data loss, so on and so forth. So now my primary node 0 is now down. Now that our primary node 0 is down and we want our secondary to assume the responsibilities of the primary, we're going to go and run through these failover steps. So we're going to SSH to the NW server, which we have here. This is my primary that died. Let's close that window. And then we will run this script, NW failover, and we're going to pass in some arguments. So the active NW host IP here, we're going to go ahead and put that in place. And we're going to put 10.10.23.101, or 100 rather. That's my primary. And then the host name. So very similar to your original setup. So I'm going to call this. So we're calling it with a couple of flags to make this standby our active. So this is our node 0s with the IP address of 10.10.23.100, which is the primary IP address, and then the primary host name. So let's go ahead and run that. Now that the process has completed, this is going to be our primary. So we do need to update the network IP and reboot. So we're going to change IP and we're going to change the host name through configuration. So let's go ahead and edit our network scripts. In my case, this is a ETH0. So I'm going to go ahead and update this guy to 0.100, save. Then we will edit that file's empty. Let's go and update our etc host. And then we're going to call the hostname ctl command with the set hostname of prod node 0p. And that should give us our new hostname. And we're going to go ahead and reboot this server. Now that the server is up, let's take a look at our current environment. So the original primary server node 0p is now offline and shut down. We mimicked a hardware fault, a catastrophe, so that server is completely gone. My secondary has now come up and taken the active role as a primary. Let's go ahead and look. So I'm logged into now the old secondary, which is the new primary. And as you can see from my admin host page, all of my appliances are back in green. I can navigate the UI and investigate and do all the things that I was able to do previously with my primary. So now the question is what to do from here. Note that this video's topic is addressing a scenario where the primary is completely offline and unrecoverable. I will look at making a subsequent video which allows the primary to be taken offline, failed over to secondary, some work done on it, brought back online, and then the failback operation. So now what do we do in this particular state, right? We have a complete catastrophe here with the primary. The secondary has come online and has assumed the role of primary, looks good. The IP is the same as the previous primary, and so on and so forth. So for all intents and purposes, this one is the primary. So I'm going to go ahead and just change the host name in my VMware view to call it the primary. I'm going to go in here and change this one to secondary, because even though this is a VM that is currently running all the software, it's still running the primary data, we're assuming here that this is a fault. So now I'm going to boot off the CD-ROM and re-image this as if I need to bring up a new secondary. So now note that the secondary has become the primary and can remain in this state for as long as you need. The specs were the same, so there's no need to defer back to the original primary. So our next steps are going to be, we're going to re-image this one with the 11.4.0 image and do all the steps that we did to bring up the secondary early in this video. That is, go through the setup process, give it the backup IP and all that configuration, and then we will go ahead and set up the sync configuration once again. So again, all this is covered in the document that I will be posting, but we're going to go back and re-image, as I mentioned. Once the re-imaging is done, we'll SSH to the primary and set up the configuration for it to now replicate this data onto this server, which is the reverse operation of where we started with originally. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave it below. I hope you found this video helpful.